Okay, so I put my internet journalist pants on again and dove deep into the world of Reddit and Blizzard forums to find out why classic players don't like retail WoW. As a person who enjoys both classic and retail, I was curious to find out why so many people prefer to stick to the classic version of the game. I scrolled through many older posts around the subject and made posts of my own, and this is what I asked. I managed to get over 400 answers, and this video is entirely based on the data gathered from those answers and some other older forum posts. Now, the last time I did a video like this about why PvEers don't like PvP, I tried to find solutions to all the problems people brought up, but in this video we're not gonna do that because, well, you'll find out when we get to the last question I asked in my forum posts. So, this video is going to be more of an essay type video where we find out the most popular reasons why some people prefer classic over retail. I'm also going to try to explain all of the topics of this video the best I can and also share some of my personal thoughts on these matters. And with that, let's move on to the video. Okay, let's start with the most brought up topics that classic players find unappealing in retail WoW. After reading all the answers and posts, I started with listing the most often highlighted issues and divided them into 5 main topics that we will cover in this video. These are MMO Feeling, Power Progression, Focus on Endgame, Complexity, and Warcraft Feeling. So, MMO Feeling. When you think of an MMO or massively multiplayer online game, what are the first things that come to your mind? For me, it's a large world, lots of players, and most importantly, interaction between those players. Now, WoW is an MMORPG, but a lot of people said that they feel like retail has lost the MMO feeling, and that retail is moving further and further away from the MMO part and leaning more towards an RPG. Many people said that retail doesn't feel like an MMO because of 2 main reasons: social interactions and the open world. Let's start with social interactions. Retail WoW is definitely a more anti-social game than classic. And this is mostly because of the fact that over the years Blizzard has tried to make accessing endgame content more convenient through LFG, and now most of the endgame is interacted with through queuing for it in the LFG tool instead of interaction between players. This has made it way easier and less cumbersome to do endgame content, but it has also removed a lot of social interaction between players. The LFG tool has also reduced the need to keep up social connections with good players you enjoyed playing with because it's so easy to find people for your groups through the LFG tool. Also, the whole fast-paced and skill-based endgame formula of retail often leaves little room and time for socializing with other players, and people are more focused on clearing the content as efficiently and as fast as possible. Many classic players find this more anti-social environment unappealing and for that reason prefer classic and the social interactions that come with it. Okay, let's move on to the open world part of the MMO feeling. Retail WoW has had 9 expansions added to the game over the last 20 years, and with each of those expansions have come more zones and areas for players to explore. The downside to this, however, is the fact that while the open world has grown larger and larger, the player base of retail WoW has only grown smaller. The outcome of this is that there are far less players out there in the different zones of the open world, especially the older zones that don't have anything to do with the current endgame content feel empty and dead because there is really no incentive for players to go into those zones. This results in many people feeling like they're playing a solo game since outside of the current expansion zones you rarely come across other players. Having an empty open world kills the MMO feeling of the game for many people and makes the game feel more like an RPG than an MMORPG. Many Classic players say that the open world in Classic feels much more alive, and for that reason they enjoy it a lot more. Now that we're done talking about the MMO feeling, let's talk about power progression. I would argue that most MMORPG players enjoy the feeling of seeing the time and effort put into the game bear fruit in the form of their characters growing stronger and more powerful. This is, in fact, a very important part of the game for many players of WoW and other MMORPGs as well. And in Classic WoW, in my opinion, the player power progression is done very well, and more time put into playing almost always results in a more powerful character. Whereas in Retail WoW, the power progression system is very convoluted and distorted because of the different systems implemented throughout the years. Okay, let me try to explain this a little bit. First of all, in Classic WoW, the player character's power progression is very linear from the very first level all the way up to the final endgame content. As you gain levels and gear, you feel their effect and get a satisfying loop of feeling your character's power grow and allowing you to take on more challenging content, which then again results in better gear and more levels. In Retail WoW, however, more often than not, the level scaling of enemies and stats make it so that as you gain more levels, you actually become less powerful as enemy scaling systems start to take effect. This feeling of your character getting worse while progressing through the game seems to be a big turnoff for many players. Another thing that many Classic players don't like about Retail's power progression is the fact that it is, in their words, an infinite treadmill. What people are referring to here is the fact that Retail WoW's seasonal progression system results in all power level progress becoming obsolete in the next season. This happens because of the huge gear item level differences between seasons, and also the various catch-up mechanics that help people reach better gear at the start of the season. This means that the gear that is hard to obtain in this current season will be very easy to obtain in the next one, making the effort put into gearing in the current season not feel so impactful in the long term. Lots of people that answered my questions disliked the fact that your power level in Retail WoW only stays relevant for the couple of months the season lasts, and then you have to start your progress all over again. Next, I will try to make it more simple to understand the differences in power progression between Retail and Classic WoW through some graphs, since it's a lot harder to try and explain in words. Okay, let's start with Classic WoW. Like I said before, Classic WoW's power progression is very linear. You start at level 1, and each level and each gear upgrade will make you stronger and make it easier for you to overcome challenges. This is not affected by any scaling systems, so for example, a level 55 elite will be hard to kill at level 55. But once you get to level 60 and you obtain some gear, the elite will be much easier to kill. Whereas in Retail, the scaling of enemies and seasonal resets make the power progression look more like a sine wave in a graph. Let's say an expansion starts at the very first peak of the wave and you have obtained good gear in the last expansion. As you start leveling and gaining more levels, the scaling systems start to take effect, and unless you constantly get good gear upgrades, the enemies will start to feel stronger and your character will start to feel weaker. This is usually at its worst around the time you reach the new maximum level. Only after you reach the new maximum level and start obtaining better gear will the power level scale start leaning in your favor. This same power level sine wave will also continue through the many seasons in the new expansion, as the seasonal endgame content is scaled for the new seasonal item levels. So, in a nutshell, many players prefer Classic because of the linear power progression where every upgrade to your character will remain an upgrade, and power progression is not reset seasonally, and you can even take a year's break from the game and still have your character be as relevant as it was before you left. Many players feel as if they wasted their time gearing a character in Retail, since that progress will eventually become obsolete. Next, I will try to make it more simple to understand the differences in power progression between Retail and Classic WoW through some graphs, since it's a lot harder to try and explain in words. Okay, let's start with Classic WoW. Like I said before, Classic WoW's power progression is very linear. You start at level 1, and each level and each gear upgrade will make you stronger and your character will start to feel stronger. This same power level sine wave will also continue through the many seasons in the new expansion, as the seasonal endgame content is scaled for the new seasonal item levels. So, in a nutshell, many players prefer Classic because of the linear power progression where every upgrade to your character will remain an upgrade, and power progression is not reset seasonally, and you can even take a year's break from the game and still have your character be as relevant as it was before you left. Okay, next we're gonna talk about Retail WoW's focus on endgame. One of the major issues that classic players find off-putting about Retail is the fact that the game mostly revolves around current endgame content. The whole game feels like it's designed to rush you through the game and get you into the current endgame loop as fast as possible. This makes the leveling and early gearing part of the game feel more like an annoying obstacle than a natural part of the game. Many classic players feel like the leveling phase in Retail is simply too fast. The leveling is so fast that you can't even complete longer storylines of the game before reaching the maximum level. And for many people, the incentive to start doing the current endgame content at that point means that they rarely get to fully experience the stories and campaigns that the leveling experience has to offer. The leveling phase of classic WoW, however, is in stark contrast to what it is in the Retail version. In classic WoW, the leveling phase feels like a natural part of the game, and some players even enjoy it over the endgame content of classic WoW. Leveling in classic takes a long time, but for me and many others, it doesn't feel like an obstacle to be quickly overcome, but more like an experience to be enjoyed. I personally feel like the slower paced leveling of classic WoW also allows you to learn your new classes more easily, as you're not bombarded with new abilities and passives left and right, and you have a lot of time to get used to how your different abilities work before you reach the maximum level. Okay, the next major topic we're gonna talk about is complexity. Many classic players said that they feel very overwhelmed by the amount of different systems implemented to the game over the years. There are 20 years worth of different systems in the game, and while most of them are not relevant in the current content, there still are a lot of systems to learn and understand. What makes this situation even worse is the fact that often the game doesn't do a very good job of explaining these systems to players.
This system sucks. There, I said it. How is anyone supposed to ever figure this out unless you read a whole freaking handbook? This doesn't make any sense.
These systems are also very hard to figure out intuitively, so more often than not, you have to Google how they work. Another thing that creates a new layer of complexity to the Retail version of the game is the fact that there are constant changes and updates being done to the game that affect class balance, systems, currencies, and so on. And in order to keep up with these changes, players have to read developer blue posts on the forums and Wowhead. I personally read weekly hotfix blue posts and different updates weekly to stay on top of things that are happening in Retail WoW. The fact that constant changes aren't being made to the classic version also means that you can take a long break from the game, and when you come back, the skills and knowledge you've gathered so far will still be relevant and useful. Whereas in Retail WoW, taking a long break and returning to the game will often mean that the game has dramatically changed, and your main class, for example, might have reworked talents and a completely new, different playstyle, and your previous experience is no longer that relevant. And many people that answered my question said that they enjoy classic WoW over Retail for this very reason. Some people prefer the fact that they know exactly what they're getting from a new character and how class balance and different systems work from the very first levels to the final endgame. Okay, moving on to our final main topic, which is Warcraft Feeling. Many people seem to feel like Retail WoW has over the years lost its identity and no longer lives up to the expectations people have for a Warcraft game, both story and graphics-wise. The lore and look of the game has in many players' eyes been very Disneyfied, and the story no longer follows in the footsteps of the more brutal and war-focused pattern that Warcraft lore used to have. The story of the game now has more of an emotional focus, and the major cinematics and storylines focus more on very Disney-feeling topics of family and friendship and feelings, which is the very opposite of what some people expect from Warcraft lore. I'm sure some people enjoy how the current story of the game is developing, but especially many classic players think that the story of Retail WoW has thematically gone in a wrong direction. A lot of WoW players grew up on Warcraft games and prefer to play Classic WoW over retail because they feel like Classic WoW still holds true to what they expect from a Warcraft game. Now we finally come to the last two questions that I asked Classic players to share their opinions on, and the reason why I didn't try to figure out how retail WoW could be made more appealing to the Classic audience. When asked about what Classic players do like about retail WoW, the answers were mostly about the transmog system and some quality of life features. But these two things were also often on the list of things that people didn't like about retail WoW, so I think the Classic community is somewhat divided on whether these things are a good or a bad thing. Okay, then moving on to the last question of what would need to change in retail in order to make Classic players consider playing it. And the vast majority of the people I asked answered that no amount of changes will make them want to play retail. Many Classic players seem to feel that retail WoW is simply too far removed from what the game used to be, and unless the whole game is remade, they simply have no interest in playing it. And for this reason, I didn't try to think of how the issues Classic players have with retail could be addressed. Many people consider Classic and retail WoW to be two very different games that are to be enjoyed for different reasons and in different ways, and I completely agree with this myself. I enjoy the fast-paced, difficult retail endgame and the collection of transmogs and mounts, but I also enjoy the chill, classical MMORPG leveling and gearing experience that Classic WoW has to offer. I would like to know how people feel about these issues, so go to the comment section and tell me if you feel like something is missing from these topics and whether you agree or disagree with them. I would also like to know how many of you are playing only Classic or only retail, or if you're playing both like I do. And finally, I want to give a big thanks to all the people who answered my questions and made this video possible. And I would of course like to thank you for watching this video. Hope to see you in the next one.